All right, welcome everybody. If you can believe it, we're already at workshop 5 of the Microsoft Power Platform Accelerator for Razor's Edge NXT. So before we get started on the build session, just a few housekeeping items, and then also just a little bit of level set on Power Apps and permissions and also some licensing as well, because it's a little bit of a different model than the rest of the Power Platform. And Microsoft makes it clear as a really murky mud on how to decipher all of this. So we'll share with you what we've learned along the way on that. So today we're going to talk about Power Apps. So this is another set of capabilities within the Microsoft Power Platform. Power Apps can be standalone applications that can run, for example, on an iPad, or they can be embedded applications within even Razor's Edge NXT, as we're going to look at today. So we're just going to show you how to build sort of the basic framework of a Power App. Power Apps can be very heavily designed. In fact, you can adopt the Sky UX framework so that it can look like the rest of the applications and services within Razor's Edge NXT. But we're gonna show you the key concepts and how you can build apps and connect those to the flows. So Power Apps on itself does come with an E1 or an E3 license, but not if you want to use a Power App with a premium connector, like the Razor's Edge NXT connector. So I tried to put some bit.ly links here in case any of you want to look at the different nonprofit pricing and offers. But typically the nonprofit rate for Power Apps is $2.50 per app per month. So it's not hugely expensive, and your IT administrator can help to facilitate that for you. For the purposes of the class, if you go to that very first link here, the Power App price, under the $40, you'll see an opportunity to launch a free trial. So if you want to play around with it and sort of build the business case for it, you can certainly get access to this set of tools without needing a license. Some of you might already have it. Some of you might need to ask for it, but hopefully it's a low enough barrier for everyone to be able to participate. Any questions on licensing? Okay. So people often ask or get a little bit confused on sort of when you would use a Power App versus something like Microsoft Forms, right? That comes as part of your license, doesn't require any sort of additional provisioning or licensing, but there's very different use cases and when you might choose to use Microsoft Forms versus Power Apps. So, Microsoft Forms is available with your basic MS Office 365 license. It's really great for surveys or quick questionnaires or routine input. It can be used both internally and externally at your organization. But you've probably noticed in working with it that it has a very sort of stagnant UI. You can't do a lot from a design perspective. You can add a background and some basic branding, but you're simply just choosing the types of questions from a pretty refined list and putting those on the form. So it can be really useful, but not in all cases. So for Power Apps, that does require an additional license, but you have a much more robust application and set of services, as Trevor's going to show you, even linking in to some of the AI and cognitive services within Power Apps. So just as rich as it goes with connectors as Power Automate itself. And that's where we're going to focus, is actually using a Power App to trigger a Power Automate workflow. That's what we're going to cover today. So it's definitely more complex and complicated to sort of put the different pieces together to create that user experience, but it's in a low code or no code sort of drag and drop interface. So once you sort of learn the mechanics of it, It's pretty easy to use, and there are predefined templates available from a design perspective that you can adopt and make things a little bit easier. So are there any questions on the difference between Microsoft Forms or Power Apps? Okay, hearing none. So after we go from the step of creating the Power App and linking that to the Power Automate workflow, then we're going to teach you how all to be app developers and embed your apps within Razor's Edge NXT. And there are a number of screens within Razor's Edge NXT that you can embed apps and Sky add-in tiles on. Sky add-in, we're going to focus on the tile component today. There are other types of add-ins like buttons and flyouts, but we're going to focus on building one of these custom tiles. And here's just a few other ideas. We're going to focus today on a typical donor service workflow that we've seen highly requested from past Accelerator students. And so that's where we're going to focus our attention. But if you think about other use cases, this one is creating a proposal from within a tile in NXT, in this case, an opportunity tile. So it's pulling information from within Razor's Edge NXT about that opportunity, referencing some data elements that can be conditionalized to build the basis of a major giving proposal. So that's one use case that has been built using this Sky add-in model. Another is the quick email. So I think a couple of you have already asked for the code for this. It absolutely exists, and this one is pretty easy. If you're interested, let us know. We can get you the code. But instead of using the Outlook add-in, where you can reference Razor's Edge NXT from within the Outlook interface, this is actually giving you the ability to send an Outlook email while you're on that constituent record, and then adding that as an action on the record with the copy of the email. So sort of meeting users where they are, trying to drive forward specific business processes and make that a lot easier without having to go outside of the Razor's Edge NXT experience. So that's what we're going to cover off today. Jim, Zalia, Trevor, anything else sort of in the preamble before we get to the build?
All good here.
Okay, well then I'm going to cede the floor.
Awesome, thank you, Heather. So I'm going to kind of take up and do some of the build work. And again, please feel free to follow along if you've got a second monitor that you can use, or use the recording afterwards. I'm going to first tackle our main objectives for what we want to get out of today's class. And it's really twofold. And to Heather's point, this is the first time we're combining both of these objectives into a single class. One is to get you all orientated on Power Apps and how to actually build out a Power App. And then the second component is actually embedding that within a Razor's Edge record as a Sky add-in tile. I am going to assume at this point, after last week's class, given that we did a series of these what I call lightning round sessions on building out these Power Automate flows, that everyone that is in here today is a Power Automate expert. So I'm going to save some of that part of it towards the end, because that's really where the magic happens to make it all work. But I want to make sure that we at least get through these two main objectives first, and then we can go back into the app and build upon it. So for those of you that have kind of been in some of the previous classes, my approach is let's start with the basics and then let's build onto it. So that's what we're going to do. To show you the example that I want to build today, I followed our own best practices and created a nice little Visio diagram of what I want this to do. And to Heather's point, our thought behind this was that you might have major gift officers or somebody who works in donor services or member services who gets requests from your existing constituents where they've moved, they've updated an email address, they've changed their phone number, and you might want to give that major gift officer the ability to input that request into the system, but have it maybe go through a little bit more scrutiny before it just gets added directly into the database. In other words, if somebody tells me that they've changed their address and I don't have rights within the Razor's Edge to make address updates, I want to at least be able to put that into some sort of queue for approval so that somebody else, maybe a database manager or a data services associate, can go in and validate that what I'm putting in is legitimate, that I'm not putting in bogus information and messing up the integrity of the database. So the way I thought of this is that we can create a dedicated tile for that particular person that doesn't have privileges to input the data. And then somebody else would then go in and either approve it, reject it, or maybe they'll go in and just manually make the update themselves. So I've split this up into basically two different processes. The first process is from the non-admin user, the major gift officer, for example, who wants to go in and sees that, hey, Trevor Kelly's address is out of date. So their process is they'll go into the Razor's Edge NXT web view, pull up a constituent record, look at their contact information and say, hey, does their information need to be updated? If the answer is no, there's nothing else that they have to do. But if the answer is yes, and I apologize that the arrow kind of looks weird here, then what they can do is they can make those updates in the custom add-in tile. And what that will do is that will push it into a holding area. And I put Q in quotes, a holding area, because again, keep in mind that their rights within Razor's Edge might be very limited. So since they don't have access to make those direct changes or those updates into Razor's Edge, we need to put this somewhere else. My example, I'm going to use a SharePoint list, but we talked a lot last week about, creating CSV files and working with Excel files. That could be an option for you all as well if that's how you want to handle this. But just so you know, for what we're going to build today, I am using a custom SharePoint list. And then from the non-admin user's perspective, that's all they have to do. That ends their process. There's nothing else that they really have to do in order to submit this request. They put it in, it goes into a separate database, sits there and waits. And then if I scroll down a little bit, now we've got the process for an admin user where the trigger is when a new item is added to this queue. And when I say queue, I'm going to be talking about a SharePoint list. So when a new item is added to the SharePoint list, the admin gets to review the data and then determines what is the course of action. Is this a legitimate address? And they go ahead and approve it. If so, I kind of took some shortcuts in here. They click the approve button. This will actually go out and push that new address or that new email address into the Razor's Edge, and that's it. If they reject it, then nothing gets pushed to Razor's Edge, but maybe we want to send some sort of response back to the requester that says, hey, you might want to go in and validate that you put in the right address and try again. Or we wanted to include this third option, right, where they're not going to approve it or reject it, but they see, oh, you know what? They put in an address, but there's a typo in here. I can tell that there's a typo. Rather than sending it back to the requester to resubmit, I'm just going to manually update it myself. And that's all they do. Does this all make sense? Kind of what we're trying to accomplish. I will take that as a yes. So let's go ahead and start building out. I'm going to start at the top and let's build out the non-admin user experience. So what would this tile, this custom add-in tile look like for those people that want to make updates but maybe don't have the privileges to do so. I am going to go into Power Apps. If you have not gone to Power Apps in the past, the URL structure is just make.powerapps.com. And when you get here, you are going to see a screen that looks something like this. It's pretty similar to probably what you see when you log into Power Automate and go to flow.microsoft.com. This is just, again, instead of making that business process flow or that workflow, we're designing that user experience for either, again, an iPhone, a tablet, could be, again, what we're going to do here is for an add-in tile. And Microsoft is really great, as with every application that they have, is they deliver some really great templates. For the purposes of this, I am not going to use a template. I'm actually going to create a Canvas app from blank. So I'm going to use this option here. I can either click on it from the home screen, or I could go to my create option in the navigation on the left-hand side. And notice that you've got a few different options here. Portal options, other type of app. There's also the ability, again, to choose one of the templates if I keep scrolling down. So let me choose this Canvas app from blank. I'm going to start from a blank canvas. It's going to ask me what the format is. Is this going to be a phone template or a tablet template? Usually, when we look at these Sky add-in tiles, the tablet option fits a little bit better. And then obviously, if you're actually creating a standalone app for a phone, you would choose the phone option. But the tablet's going to give you more of that square shape that fits nicely within a Razor's Edge record. So I'm going to use that. You can always resize it afterwards if it doesn't seem to fit what you're trying to do. And then I'm going to give this a name. I'm going to call it class. We're in class 5, constituent update tile. And then I'll click create. Microsoft's going to go out and do its thing. Tells me that it's getting things ready, which is a good sign. So I get to wait for this. And when it comes back, notice since I said that this is me just starting from a blank canvas, starting from scratch, that's exactly what it gives me. It gives me this blank panel here. And the way I like to think about this is, I create a lot of PowerPoint slides, so this is kind of, to me, like creating a PowerPoint slide. If you create Word documents a lot, you've got a lot of the similar tools that you might have when you create any sort of Microsoft artifact. So this is, again, kind of consider this a Microsoft artifact where you can add text, you can add images, you can add charts, you can add input fields, whatever you want to do. You can do that. And you've got a few different options for accessing different areas of the app. We'll kind of talk about this tree view, and this is going to show you all the different elements that you add to your canvas, like if you have a text input or if you have a drop down or some sort of menu, you'll be able to see all those items. Notice it's got this layered or the stacked icon highlighted. You also have the ability to connect it to data. So for example, if I want to connect this app to the Razor's Edge, I can go in and search Blackbaud. And I might have to click add data first and type in Blackbaud. And again, you might have just one on here. I've got a few custom connectors. And I'm going to say I want to connect this app to the Razor's Edge NXT. And I'm not sure which one I've used recently. Got a bunch of different Razor's Edge environments. But what this is going to do is it's going to allow me, if I wanted to, I could go in and display information from the Razor's Edge NXT. So if I'm on a record and I want to display a spouse's information, I could do this. One of the add-in tiles that I built was kind of rolling up all the household information, so household opportunities or actions that are related to the households, which pulls up not only this constituents record that I'm looking at, but also the spouses. So those are some things that you can do and display that information all within the tile. And then there's a few other areas that we may or may not get to, but I'm gonna keep myself probably in this tree view because I like to be able to see all the different components that I add to my app. And so you're probably wondering at this point, well, how do I add components? The very top, you've got your menu bar, and insert is where you can go in and see all of those different components that you can add, which includes things like pictures and charts and icons, as well as inputs like buttons and text inputs and radio buttons and things like that. Or if we just wanted to do some text, so just labels or HTML text, you have the ability to do that as well. So let's start, because I know that time is of the essence and we want to get as much into this as we can. Let me start by adding a input, and I'm going to do a drop down for the first input that I add. And every time I add anything to my app, normally the first thing that I do is I rename it. And you've got a set of properties over on the right-hand side when you select one of those components. And notice that I can rename, instead of drop down 1, I can rename it something else. And this is going to be, what type of change is going to be what I'm going to call it, type of change. Reason why is because when they get to this tile, I might want to offer different options. Do you want to change the email address? Do you want to change the postal address? Do you want to change the phone number? Whatever options you want to give the user to make updates, they're going to choose it from this drop down. All right. So let me rename that. And now this is more, makes more sense than just drop down 1. And then because this is going to be on a constituent record as a tile, I always think of this, from the perspective of, this is going to be much smaller than how we're looking at it, right? If I zoom out a little bit, the tile is actually going to look something like maybe this. So I want to make it readable for somebody who is looking at this on the record. So I might just go in and make this a little bit bigger and move it around a little bit. Again, you could just drag and drop it, place it wherever you want to. And then in the properties, on, again, the right-hand side, I can change the text size, I can change the color. Let's see if I can find my scroll bar here. So instead of 13, I might make this bigger. Change the color, instead of a blue, maybe make it more consistent with what's already in Razor's Edge. Change the border here as well. All right, and then again, you can look at all these different properties. You can make things visible or invisible. So notice this visibility, I can turn that on or off, depending on, maybe there's a condition. Maybe you have to fill out something first, and if they fill it out in a certain way, it makes this field visible. So that's a really great way to toggle that. And then it's going to ask for the items up in the top. So I can either pull items from the Razor's Edge NXT, since that is a data source that I had pulled in here, or alternatively, if I go up to the top, notice that in this dropdown, you've got kind of all these same properties that we just saw on the right-hand side. So visible is in here, the font size, I believe, is in here somewhere, the font and the font weight and all of that. But also when I click on items, I can use a formula instead of using a data source. And in my formula, I might only want to include certain types of changes that they can make. So I'm going to use my open and close square brackets. And within them, I'm going to put all the options. And I'm going to put the options in quotes. So my first option might be email address. Right? And then my second option might be postal address. And I can have a third option for phone number. I can keep going. Maybe there's a custom field that you want to allow them to update and things like that. So I'm just going to put all the different options in my square brackets, separate them with a comma, and make sure that they're in quotes. And so if I hit the play button, which is in the upper right-hand corner, I can test this and see if it actually works. Yep, I can change the value from email address to postal address, change it to phone number. You get the idea. All right, so this is actually a working app. This works. This is doing something right now. It's not doing much, but hey, we've got something on here. And then after we've got the type of change, I probably want to add another input. So I'm going to go to under insert, I'm going to go under input, add a text input, move it around, resize it, make it big enough so that it's readable. I'm going to go over to the right-hand side and rename this, and I'm going to say, what's the new value of whatever they're changing? What's the new phone number? What's the new email address? What's the new postal address? And then notice that there's some default text. Maybe before we do that, let me change the font size again to 40 so we can see it a little bit better. Add some default text automatically, which you can put default text in if you want to. Normally, the first thing I do with these text inputs is I delete the default text because I don't want to, if somebody doesn't fill this out, I don't want it to stick with the default text, which is, it just says text input, not very helpful. Instead, what I do is I go under hint text and I start typing in some help text. What's the helplet to help people understand what we're asking for in this field? I'm going to say something like, please enter the new value for, and let me hit enter here because I actually want it to pull in the dynamic content from the drop down above. So please enter the new value for phone number. Please enter the new value for email address. And the way you can do that, again, is if I go to my formulas area at the top, I'm going to switch this to, what's it called? Hint text. And if you've ever used Excel, you know that there's Excel functions that you can use. Same thing with Power Apps. I can use a concatenate function. There it is. And I want to concatenate this, please enter the new value for the standard text. And then I'm going to put a comma. I want to take the value that's selected in that drop down above. So we called that, and I'm going to use my cheat sheet, which is over to the left. We called that type of change. So I'm going to just use type of change. And notice what happens here. Autocomplete is your friend. Saves you a lot of keystrokes. Notice that type, all I had to do was type in type. I can select type of change. And then I'm going to use a period to grab the selected text out of that dropdown. And I'm going to put another period because it doesn't like that. And I'm going to grab that value, the value of the selected text. And then I'm going to close this out. All right, so that's what my formula looks like. I'm concatenating standard set of text, and then I'm adding type of change dot selected text dot value. All right, now, just so you can see what this looks like, I'm going to hit play again. Notice that the help text or that hint text shows me what it looks like for phone number. If I change this to email address, notice it updates what the hint is. Does that make sense to everyone what just happened? So believe it or not, by putting in these formulas, you're programming what this actually looks like as a citizen developer. I think I'm going to add one more thing here, and I might just do another drop down. I'm going to add an input drop down and make this hide, go away. Again, I'm going to move this maybe under here. Make this a little bit bigger. go over to the right-hand side and rename this. And I'm going to say what is the type category? Because if I selected email address, you might have primary email address, business email address, home email address. You've got all those different code tables. Probably want to pass that along so that that can get updated with the appropriate value in there as well. So I'm going to say type category. And I'm going to scroll over and change my color scheme and font and make it look maybe a little bit better. I think I might have mentioned this in previous classes. I am not a visual designer type of person, so usually my stuff doesn't look all that pretty, but at least it works. You guys are probably way more advanced when it comes to making things look pretty, but I just want this to work. So I'm changing the color scheme. I made it a little bit bigger. Again, I want to add different values in here based on what they put in that type of change. So I'm going to go up into my formula, and here's where I can start doing some really cool things. I want to say, again, I can use my open and close brackets and put in the different types. If email address is selected, I think in mine I've got email as a type. I might have email1 as another type. But if postal address is selected, I think I've got home, I've got business, I've got shipping address, seasonal address, things like that. So I want to make this dynamic. What I can do is I can basically set up an if statement here. And notice my autocomplete is giving me if. And I can say, notice it's asking, what's the logical test? I'm going to say if the type of change, which is the second one, that's selected, text dot value is equal to, I'm going to say email address, then what do you want to display if that is a true statement? If that is a true statement, I want to show all the different email types. And then you can do the same thing if this is a postal address. And then there's also if false, do you want to display something else? So I can close this here. And just again, to show you what this would look like, hit the play button. Since I've got email address on there, it's giving me the email option, and that's the only option. But if I were to change this to postal address, notice it goes away. Or if I change this to phone number, it goes away. I can't choose the email type because maybe there's different types based off of what kind of change I'm making. Does that make sense to everyone, what I just did? And I'm going to simplify this a little bit. I'm basically going to say, if it's not an email address, let me just include my different options for postal addresses, which might be home, business, put that in quote, and I might have others in there. And maybe I'm going to get rid of phone number as an option because that's just going to complicate things beyond what I want to do today. All right. So I've got, if the type of change selected value is email address, we're going to get the email options in here. If it's not email address, what's the default? I'm going to choose home or business because the only other option that I added here was postal address. And we've got maybe different postal address types that we can use. So now, postal address, I've got home and business as an option. But if I change this to email address, I've got just my email type as an option. And again, I'm probably overcomplicating this just so that you can see what options are available to you in this formula bar. But again, you've got the ability to go in and add whatever, same sorts of things that you can do in Power Automate, just thinking in terms of using this formula bar. And Google is your friend when it comes to trying to figure out what types of formulas we can add. Again, it's meant to be maybe low code versus no code, but it does give you the flexibility to dynamically make these fields do something.
Hey, Trevor.
Yeah.
If the concatenate function is not working, can you just go back to that box?
Yep.
Type of change.
Yeah, so what I did for the concatenate is I chose which property am I going to insert this. And notice that in this dropdown, I'm making the hint text concatenate this kind of hard-coded, please enter the value for, and then dynamically taking the selected text value from the type of change dropdown. And all I'm doing is adding a comma. I could add another comma in here if there was more text I wanted to add concatenate afterwards. But that's how that formula works.
All right, thank you.
All right. The other thing I'm not going to add here, but I'm just going to show you real quick, is you can add labels in here. And labels could be any just display of text. So if I add a label, just going to move this. Again, I can make it bigger. I can change the font again, make it 40. I can change the name of this. Again, here's where you can either go in and notice that the formula bar is putting just what is the label actually going to say. I can say hello world here if I wanted to, or again, using this formula bar. And since I've already added Razor's Edge as a data source, I could start typing in Blackbaud, I think. I'm waiting for, here it is. I'm waiting for the autocomplete to pop up because again, I don't know the syntax for what it's doing here, but I could say, okay, Blackbaud Razor's Edge NXT, let me click on that. And I want to display something from the constituent record. So you can use your get constituent option. And notice you've got get action, get appeal, get campaign. You can say get constituent. Notice it's asking for the constituent ID, and this is the system record ID of the constituent. I'm going to put 275. I'm putting it in quotes. And then I'm going to close it. And then I can put a period after that, and it's going to give me all of the fields that are available from that constituent record. So I can pull out the gender, I can pull out the income, the industry, the name, the lookup ID, the marital status. Just wanted to display the name here. And then hit enter. And it's telling me I'm not authenticated. Let me see if I can fix that connection. Make sure I'm logged into the right database here.
Trevor, while you're fixing the connection, Dan had a question in the chat about instead of typing out all of the table options, could you get the table of address types directly called from Razor's Edge NXT?
You can. The way you would do that, though, is you have to call it through the APIs. Can't call it from the Microsoft connector because there's not a get code table values from the connector itself. And normally what I like to do is I like to kind of, choose the ones that I want. This gives you a little bit more flexibility because there might be table values in there that you don't want just any old user to use. Maybe this app is only allowing us to update the home or the business address. We're not allowing them to update any other type of address. So, I mean, there's different ways to kind of think about it. You could connect to, the APIs are available if you wanted to go ahead and build a connector to get them. Our standard connector for Microsoft Power Platform does not include the ability to retrieve or list those table values, if that makes sense.
It does. Thank you very much.
Sure. All right, so I must have chosen the wrong database because it's telling me to restart it. So let me just go ahead and save this real quick. And then let me restart this so that we can actually see this.
Having a test database is a blessing and a curse.
Yep. So, and this is actually good to show too. So if I want to go back into the app that I just created, I can go to the apps area. And this, you can see I've got a lot of different apps that are out there. I call this class 5. I might have to search for it because I've got so many. Class 5 constituent tile update. I can go back in and edit it. And hopefully it'll refresh my Razor's Edge connection to the right one. And if it doesn't, that's okay because it doesn't really need to show the constituent's name. Looks like it did work, but if I'm on the constituent record, you've got access to all the constituent information right there on the same screen anyway. So I'm probably not going to include the constituent's name. It's not necessary in this particular case. So I'm just going to remove this, or I can make it invisible, up to you. I just hit the delete button. And then again, if doesn't really need to have the Razor's Edge connector right now because I'm not displaying information from the Razor's Edge. And when the user hits the submit button here, it's actually submitting it to a separate data source besides Razor's Edge. I'm pushing it to a SharePoint list. So I'm going to remove the Razor's Edge as well. And the only other thing I really need, there's actually 2 things I really need. One is a button once I've completed this. So I'm going to insert a button. And let me see if I can hide some of that. And that button, let me move it wherever I want it to go. Maybe put it in the center here. Make it a little bit bigger. Change my my font size. And I probably don't want it to say button, so I'm going to change this to submit. I'm also going to change the name of this. Instead of button 1, I'm going to say submit. All right. And then the last thing that I need is, because we're embedding this in the Razor's Edge constituent record, I need to be able to have a context record ID. And this context record ID is allowing us to basically pull within the Power App tile who this constituent is. So basically, I want to get the system record ID of the constituent. And if we were to add a tile on a campaign record in Razor's Edge NXT WebView, I'd want the campaign system record ID. Or if this was going on a gift record, I would want the system record ID of the gift. So in order to pull this into the app, what we do is we typically add another input field, text input. And I'm not going to resize this because I'm not even going to make it visible. It's going to be a hidden field eventually, but I do want to rename it. So I'm going to call this constituent ID or cons ID, whatever I want to call it here. And then instead of it saying text input, this is really important, I am actually taking a parameter from the URL to insert that system record ID. So if I were to go to, just pull up my record, I want to basically take that 275 and be able to use it within my app. So I am going to basically grab this parameter from the URL and pull it into my Power App. The way I do that is I type in the word param because it's a URL parameter. And then it's going to ask me to name it. And the name is really important, and I'll tell you why when we get to actually adding this as a Sky add-in tile. But for anything that is contextual, basically that we need it to understand what record it's on, we use this parameter that we name context record ID. And just to make sure that I am using the right one, the way context is, it's context underscore record ID. And when I say record ID, I mean a lowercase r. And it's really important that it is exactly spelled like this. So I will put this in the chat so that everybody has that. So that is the formula in order to make sure that the app understands which record you're actually on. And we'll actually be able to see this because I'm not hiding this yet. I'm probably going to hide it a little bit later on once we can validate that this is working correctly. All right, let me keep moving for the sake of time. I also want one other thing to happen. When they click the submit button, not only am I going to push this into a SharePoint list, but I want to basically take the user to a new screen that says that the request has been submitted. So if you want to add a new screen here, there is under Insert, this new screen option. And rather just clicking on new screen, click the little down arrow next to it because in this particular case, I do want to use a template. I want to use this little success one that gives me a nice little checkbox that says, hey, or check mark, says, hey, you've hit the submit button, you're good to go. So let me use the success option. Notice it adds screen 2. And then I can change the wording if I want to. This was successfully completed. I'm going to just change this and say your request has been submitted. All right. And so now I've got all the elements on screen 2. I can add more pictures. I can add more text. I can do whatever I want on screen 2. But if I want to go back to screen 1, click on screen 1 here. Let me make it so that when you click submit, that it goes to screen 2. You actually have to tell Power Apps to go to screen 2 when they click the submit button. Otherwise, Power Apps doesn't know what to do if I click submit. And if I wanted to test this, again, you can hit play. I can hit submit all day long and it's not going to do anything. So let's make it do something. I'm going to highlight the submit button. And then there's a property for on select. Notice right now it's just set to false. In other words, it's not doing anything. So let me get rid of that. And the formula that I want to use when they select it or when they press it is going to be to navigate. Just type in nav. Here's the autocomplete. And then where am I having them navigate? Start typing in screen 2.
21 to 49.
And then I'm going to close the parentheses. So when they click submit, navigate to screen 2. Let's see if that works. Boom. All right. So if there's no other questions, we've got 2 screens. Doesn't really do anything yet, but I want to just show you that we've been able to successfully not only create a Power App, but add different text elements to it, a button. It successfully navigates from screen 1 to screen 2. That's all I want to do right now. I'm actually going to make this do something in a bit. And the way we're going to have it do something, let me go to my, and save this real quick. And I'm also going to publish it. So when you save it, you might be offered the option to publish it. I'm going to say publish this version. I'm going to do a version 2 that actually goes in and calls a Power Automate flow. But for now, I just want to see if I can get this to be embedded in Razor's Edge NXT. Once it's embedded, I can come back into the Power App and make changes and publish those changes as we just saw. And that automatically updates what it looks like in Razor's Edge. So you don't have to do the next few steps more than once. All you have to do in order to get this to get into Razor's Edge is create the tile, and then you can make new versions of the app. It automatically cascades in the Razor's Edge NXT, if that makes sense. So let's see how that works. I've saved this Power App. if I go back into my list of all the Power Apps that are in here, and the way I do that is I'm just on make.powerapps.com, click on apps, and I've got a number of ones in there. See if I can find, where was it? Class 5. We've had a few class 5s in the past. Might be at the very end. Maybe I'll just sort it by name so I can find it easier. And the reason why I want to do this, here it is, constituent update tile, is I want to actually get to the details behind this. So I'm going to click on the 3 dots here and click on details, because this app ID is very, very important. So keep that in mind. If you can get to the details of your app, and you can do that by going to apps, find the app, click on the 3 dots and say view details, you can grab this app ID. Very important that you have that tucked away somewhere if you copy and paste it in a notepad file or something. Because what we're going to do now is we are going to go to the Blackbaud Sky API developer website, and we are going to create a Sky app. We created a Power app. Now we need a corresponding Sky app. And the way you do that is by going into your developer account. Hopefully all of you know how to get here, developer.blackbaud.com/SkyAPI. If you don't already have a developer account, you can create one for free. Blackbaud does not charge you to develop Sky apps. As long as you have a Blackbaud ID, which I think most of you do, if you can log into Razor's Edge, you've got a Blackbaud ID, you can associate that with a new developer account. I've already done that, so I can't show you what that looks like, but it's going to ask you a few questions. It takes less than 2 minutes in order to create a developer account. But once you've done that, you're going to have an option to see your applications. So I'm going to click on my applications in here. These are all of my Sky applications. And you can see that I've done this a few times before. I've got 15 applications that I have developed, 15 Sky applications that I've developed. Today, I'm going to add a new one. I'm going to create a new Sky application that points to my Power app. So let me click on Add. It's going to ask me for some information. What's the name of this application? I'm going to call it Class 5, Constituent Update Tile. It's going to ask for details. This is a required field. This allows a non-privileged user to update constituent information. The organization name, this is your organization. You guys, or if you decide to leave your organization and start your own company, this is your company's name. So you as a developer can create your own organization, your own vendor name. This could be Trevor Kelly's add-ins. I'm just going to put that this is Blackbaud. So basically this Sky app is the property of Blackbaud. I can put a logo in here if I wanted to. And then it's going to ask me for a website URL. And this might be where you include some sort of instructions on how to use the app. If somebody gets stuck and needs help, this would be the link that they would click on in order to understand how the app actually works. I'm just going to put the Blackbaud homepage here because I didn't create any sort of website that talks about this app. So instead, I'm just going to point them to blackbaud.com. Questions so far? See if I can make this. It doesn't even give me suggestions here. So I'm just going to save it. Notice that it gives me, creates an application ID. This is going to be important in a few minutes. But then it gives me options for what do I want to do with this. And notice that there is a section down below for add-ins. So I'm going to add an add-in to my app. Click Add here. It's going to ask me to name this add-in. And you could have Sky apps that have 5 or 6 different add-ins. Maybe this one app not only adds an add-in to the constituent record, but it also adds an add-in to the gift record and maybe on the campaign record. So you've got, you can add as many add-ins as you want to per app if you want to. So this is going to be the constituent update tile is my name. The extension point is where in the Razor's Edge are we putting this tile? And for constituents, notice that there is a constituent tile dashboard is what we want to use.
Trevor, we lost your drop down, I think, because there we go.
Yep, so you're going to see a lot of different options. Unfortunately, I don't know why Teams doesn't want to share it, but you're going to see campaign options. You're going to see, there's even some Financial Edge ones in here. If any of you use Financial Edge and want to extend Financial Edge NXT, there's event stuff on here, gifts, opportunities. So you get to determine where you want to add this tile. I'm adding it to the constituent record. So it is called constituent tile dashboard. And now it's asking for the add-in URL. Now, here's where things are amazing, and you all are the first to actually see this besides internal Blackbaud folks. In the olden days, you used to have to create a custom HTML page. And so we would ask our Accelerator students to go into Illuminate Online or Net Community or WordPress if they have WordPress or Drupal and create their own custom HTML page that's probably 20 to 30 lines of code that they would have to write out. And it ended up being a little bit of a barrier because maybe some of you all have to go to a different team in order to access WordPress or Drupal or Illuminate. And we wanted to make this really, really friendly for citizen developers. So what we did is we created a URL structure for you so that you don't have to create your own HTML page. That URL structure looks like this. And I am going to put this in the chat real quick. And I'm going to add it right here into my add-in URL. So most of this I don't have to touch. But if you look kind of towards the middle or towards the end, there is an argument within the URL for app ID. That app ID is from Power Apps. It's this long string of characters and numbers. So I'm going to copy that. And when I go into this URL, I am going to highlight, including the curly braces, and remove where it says app ID and put in the Power App ID. And notice at the end, it's also giving me curly braces for the title. So the title is what actually displays at the top of the tile. If I go into my record, notice that we've got a title for giving, a title for opportunities. What do you want your title to be for your Sky add-in? So I'm going to go back in here, and instead of it saying hello world, the reason why I left hello world in here is because it actually needs an ASCII character for spaces. So that %20 is that ASCII character. So if you have any spaces in your title, use %20 instead of the space. So I might call this one constituent %20 update %20 for the space Power App. Okay, so I only had to do 2 things here. Instead of having to go out and create your own custom HTML file, which is great. If you still want to do that, you certainly can. All I'm doing is I am using the structure that's already been created by Blackbaud and just filling in those 2 parameters, the Power App ID and what I want to call it, how I want it to display in the title bar. So let me save that. Notice that it's now in my app. this add-in is in my Sky app, and I've got my application ID. Now, if I go to Razor's Edge right now and refresh this, it's not going to do anything because I added this in my developer account. Step 2 is to go in and add it to the Razor's Edge environments that you want to see this add-in tile. So I'm going to say this probably 5 or 6 more times before I actually do it. What I am about to do, as soon as I hit the submit button, it is going to immediately update what the Razor's Edge constituent record looks like for everyone that is in Razor's Edge right now. So this is another plug for a test environment. If you want to test this out and you don't want other Razor's Edge users to see a test tile that we haven't really tested yet, then do this in the test environment. Don't do it in your production. If you don't have a test environment, this is your word of caution that you are about to change the experience for everyone that is logged into Razor's Edge right now. All right. So I am in my demo environment, which means that there are very few people that are going to be seeing what I'm about to do. And because I'm in Razor's Edge and I am logged in as a supervisor, I have access to this control panel in the Razor's Edge NXT. And under control panel, I see this option for applications. When I click on it, it is going to show me any available apps that are in the marketplace that I could potentially connect to my Razor's Edge environment. And then I can go to this connected apps area and it's showing me all of the apps that are already connected to this Razor's Edge environment. So I added, the Gmail connector, the Outlook connector to this. There's bold type news that I've already added to this environment. But if I want to add the Sky app that I just created, all I have to do is hit Connect App. It's asking for the application ID. If I go back, remember that application ID is the Sky application ID. So I'm going to copy this, which is a different set of characters and numbers. And when I hit paste, notice what it's doing. It's saying, hey, this is the class 5 constituent update Sky app that I just created. It was developed by Blackbaud. This is the vendor name, that organization name that you put in there. And again, I'm going to say this just as an abundance of caution. Before you hit continue here, make sure you know what environment that you're in, because if you're in production, all of a sudden, once I hit continue, that tile is going to start popping up on all constituent records. So I feel comfortable because I'm in a demo environment. I am going to hit continue. Luckily, it gives me a little bit of a warning. And now I can hit connect if I feel comfortable doing so. So hopefully this works. Tells me it's connected. Can go to the application website. This is just blackbaud.com, so I'm not going to do that. And I'm going to close this. And now if I go to a record, let's go back to my record. It's going to load all of the tiles that already exist. And at the very bottom of the page, it should, if I did this correctly, it should show me my Power App. So let's scroll all the way down. There it is. Again, it took the title that we included in that URL structure, constituent update Power App. I've got my different inputs in here. If I change this from email address to postal address, notice that it changes the different options down here. I can enter in the new value. Notice that it concatenated the text that says, please enter new value for, and then again, if I change this to email address, it updates that, that hint text that you see here. And here's a really important thing to notice. Remember this last text input that we added, the very bottom, and it's really tiny because I didn't change the size of this. I'm eventually going to hide it. but notice that it pre-populates it with 275. Remember we put that context record ID parameter? It's actually pulling that from the URL. This is really important because if I go to a different record, let's not go to Trevor Kelly's record. Let me go to Robert Hernandez. And I'm going to scroll all the way down and find my custom tile. Maybe I scrolled too far. Here it is. Notice that his system record ID is 280. So it's pulling that 280 that's in the URL and pulling it into the app. This is really important because when I hit submit, I'm going to go back into my app and make some updates now because I want to actually point it to Power Automate. And I'm going to pass this 280 or the 275 or the 1338722, whatever the system record ID is of the constituent whose updates, so that we know which constituent we're making a change for. All right. So luckily for everyone in here, we were able to meet our 2 objectives for today. We were able to create the Power App and add some stuff to it. And then we were able to add it as a custom add-in. Now let's actually make it work. Because if I just hit the submit button here, it takes me to screen 2, right? It tells me that the request has been submitted, but I didn't do anything to actually push this data anywhere. So let's go back into the app and make that update. The rest of this class, or the rest of the 17 minutes that we have left is just going into Power Automate and making things happen. All right, the heavy lifting's really been done in terms of making the Power App work. Now we actually have to make it work with the data, and we're going to do that in Power Automate. Again, the nice thing is if I go back in here and make any changes to my app, I don't have to do anything in the Sky Developer website because I've already done all that work. All I have to do is save and publish, and it automatically updates the Razor's Edge add-in tile because it's pointing back to this app ID. So I don't have to go in and redo any of the Sky app work that I just did. So let's do that. Let's go ahead and make some updates. I'm going to highlight the submit button. Notice that we already have an action to navigate to screen 2, but I also want an action to go in and call a Power Automate flow and send it all this information. So I am going to go to the action menu item here and notice that there's an option for Power Automate. So basically when I click this button, I want to trigger a Power Automate flow. So let me click on Power Automate. And you've got a few different options. I can either use an existing Power Automate flow that we might have created in the past, or if I scroll all the way down, there's the option to create a brand new flow. So I'm going to use that option. I'm going to create a new flow and send that flow all of the information that the user had filled out. It's going to offer me some templates. I don't like using templates, as you probably know by now, so I'm just going to go to the create option in Power Automate. And I am going to go to, I want to say automated cloud flow. And the trigger is going to be Power Apps, which isn't in here. So I lied. I'm not going to go to automated cloud flow. I'm going to go to instant cloud flow. And here we've got a trigger for Power Apps. So that is the trigger. Somebody hits the submit button in my Power App. Of course, I have to add a name to this, class 5, constituent update, and I'm going to create it. So the triggers that we looked at before was like that scheduled trigger every night at 11 p.m. Last week, we did a lot of those instant cloud flows where you just click on a, click run and it runs. With this, I want Power Apps to be the trigger. I want that submit button to be the trigger. And at this point, The only thing that I'm doing is I am passing all of that information into SharePoint. Again, you can pass it into Razor's Edge, but keep in mind that the person who's going to be using this may or may not have access to the Razor's Edge database to update certain types of records. So that's why I want to put it in a holding area. And just so you know, to save some time, at the very right before class, I created a SharePoint list. SharePoint list is just a set of columns and rows, just like an Excel file. So I've got the constituent ID as a column, what the new value is that they're updating, the new address, the new email address value, the flag, whether this is a postal, email, or phone number update, the type value, which is, is this a home address, is this a business address? So basically taking all the data from the form and populating the SharePoint list. Again, you don't have to do it this way. You can do it through Excel files if that's easier for you. But if you've got access to SharePoint, using SharePoint lists is a really super simple way to create kind of a separate data store. So the only thing I'm going to do with this flow is I am going to go to my SharePoint connector, and I am going to create an item in my SharePoint list. So I'm choosing create item, and then it's going to ask me which SharePoint list am I adding items. So I got to find the appropriate SharePoint site, called it RENXT demo. And the SharePoint list name was constituent update requests. And now it's going to give me all of those fields. So the title was actually the constituent ID. For each of these, I'm basically going to say ask in Power Apps. So what's the constituent ID? What's the new value? Notice that ask in Power Apps isn't there anymore, but if I hit see more under dynamic content, can ask in Power Apps again. Is this postal, email, or phone? Again, I'm going to ask in Power Apps because that's where all that information is coming from. And then the type, is this home, business, email one, primary email, business email? Again, I'm going to say see more, ask in Power Apps. That's all I'm going to do. I'm just going to create this in SharePoint, replicate the information that they put in Power Apps into a SharePoint list. And then the second flow that I'm going to create is the admin experience. If you think back to this flow chart that we created, my second flow is going to be everything under here. And we may or may not get to that today. If not, again, I'll just post the code and send it to you all. But let's see if this works. I'm going to go back in. I'm going to save this. Tells me it's saving, it's saved. And so now, if I go back into my app, I should see class 5 constituent update. That flow I just created shows up in this list when I said Power Automate up here. So let me click on class 5 constituent update. It's adding this flow into the Power App, and now it's asking me for all of those things in here that I said ask in Power Apps, the title, the new value, the email, postal or phone, all of that. It's asking me where within the Power App am I getting this information from. So the first thing is title. Title is actually the same thing. I actually renamed it in my SharePoint list to constituent ID or cons ID. So what is the constituent ID? That is going to be coming from that system record ID that we did in this field down here. And we called that one cons ID. I'm looking at my cheat sheet over the left-hand side. That's the text input that we called cons ID. So if I do cons ID, use my autocomplete here, I want the text that is within that input. So cons ID.text. That's going to pass it the system record ID that we take from the page that we're on. The next item is what is that new value? What's the new email address? What's the new postal address? What's the new phone number? And we have a text input. If I look at my cheat sheet on the left, we've got new value. So I'm going to type in new value, use my autocomplete and click on that. And then I'm going to get the text that is within that field. Put another comma. Is this a postal change, an email change, or a phone change? Well, that's in that first dropdown that we created, which we called type of change. So I am going to type out type of change, use my autocomplete, and then I want the selected text value. That's going to pass whether this is an email address change or a postal change. And then finally, the last thing that this flow needs is this type category. Is this email 1, email 2, home, business, shipping, vacation, seasonal? So that one is the type category. And again, I want whatever the user selected, so the selected text dot value. Close that out.
I love how they're lighting up in colors and then color coordinating it to the canvas.
Yes.
Really helpful.
Yep. All right, so this is what it does when I click the submit button. So as soon as I hit submit, it is calling class 5 constituent update. It's calling that Power Automate flow and passing it all of these arguments. It's passing it the system record ID of the constituent, the new value, the type of change, and the type category. The last thing I want to do, and it seemed to have gotten rid of it, which is fine, I can add it back in. I want it to navigate to screen 2. So if I want to add on additional commands when they click this button, after we send it to Power Automate, I'm going to do a semicolon and add back in navigate to screen 2 and close that out. All right, so it tells me that it's saved, but it hasn't been published yet. So if I go back into the Razor's Edge, and if I were to refresh this page, it is still not going to be updated with what we just did. So I need to go in and publish this new version. Again, I'm going to go back to File at this point. It says it's saved, but I'm going to save it again. And then I'm going to make sure that I publish this version, which basically sends it out, cascades it to Razor's Edge and anywhere else that this app is being used. So I'll hit publish, publish this version, says it's been saved and published. And so now, if I go back to Robert's record, I'm going to refresh this one more time. Make sure it pulls the right version of my Power App. And then if I scroll down far enough, I should be able to see it. All right, now notice what happens here. Because in my flow, I'm connecting to SharePoint, we need to make sure that the user has access to that SharePoint list. So again, you can permission this appropriately. That's why I didn't include Razor's Edge, because this user might not have permission to write new addresses or make changes to the Razor's Edge. So because we're giving them access to SharePoint, I'm going to allow this. And now I can go in and choose whatever option I want to. Postal address, I'm going to make up a 1234 Main Street in Charleston, South Carolina, 29492. Again, I just made this one line. We can use Cloud Immersive or one of the tools that we talked about last week if we wanted to parse this address out once it gets approved and make sure that it goes into the right fields in Razor's Edge. I can just validate. I didn't make this invisible yet, but I can validate that we are in system record ID 280 because that's what it says in the URL, and that's what it says down here. And now I'm going to submit. And when I hit submit, it does take me, it navigates to screen 2, but it also should have called the flow and updated my SharePoint list, which lo and behold, that's exactly what it did. So I've got the constituent ID, I've got the new value. We said it was a postal address change, and the new value type is home. All right. I'm going to quickly, in the last 4 minutes, and it might be a little bit over, so I will not be offended if anyone has to leave right at 2 o'clock, but I do want to just kind of close the loop here and say, okay, now that the end user has submitted that, how do we make it so that we can actually write this data into Razor's Edge if it gets approved? And the way we do that is kind of similar to how I set up my flowchart in Visio. I'm adding a whole other Power Automate flow for an admin user experience. So I'm going to go in and create a new Power Automate flow. And this is going to be an automated cloud flow. And it's going to be triggered when a new item is created in SharePoint, because that's where I put my queue. So I'm going to say that this is class 5, admin, change of constituent change. Right. So when a new item is added in SharePoint, this is where we can create. Of course, it's going to ask me which SharePoint list. So let me find that one that I created specifically for this. RENXT demo, constituent update requests. And now we're going to say, go ahead and launch an approval. I'm going to search for approval. I want somebody to go out and say that this is a legitimate address update. So start and wait for an approval is what I want here. And the approval type, I'm just going to do approve or reject. I know in my flow or in that diagram, I have kind of 3 different options. You can either approve it, reject it, or manually update it. You might want to do a custom response for that, but I can update that afterwards and do that. Just for the purposes of getting through all of this in the next few minutes here, I'm just going to say the first 2, approve it or reject it. And then the title of this approval is going to be a constituent change was submitted. Who is this assigned to? So who's responsible for validating all of these changes? I'm just going to assign it to me. I'll be the approver in this case. And then the details. So the details can be, you know, again, I can pull it from the Razor's Edge. I can include a get constituent if I want to look at not only the existing, the current address or the current phone number, but also everything that was entered into that SharePoint item or entered into the Power App. So I can say something like, please validate that this information is accurate for constituent. And then I'm going to take their ID. I'm sorry, the title field is actually their ID, right? And then I can put in something like the type of change it was, and then what's the new value, which new value I'll include in there. It lets me. And anything else that I might want to include in here, I don't know where it's going in. And then the item link, normally what I would do here is use that direct link into the constituent's record so that if they need to review anything that exists on the constituent record, we can do http://renxt.blackbaud.com. If you remember from the last couple of weeks, the structure is constituents / whatever the system record ID is, which lives in that tile. All right, and then at this point, I can do a condition, right? So if they approve it, so if the outcome of this approval is equal to approve, that's when I want to go into the Razor's Edge And you probably need a couple other conditions, right? So if this is an address update, we want to add a new address. If this is an email update, we want to add a new email address. So we probably want to look at that field that we included as part of that data. For now, I'm just going to go in and let's pretend that this is a address update, postal address. So Blackbaud, Razor's Edge. I'm going to say create new address, create a constituent address. And then again, I can take the constituent ID, which is in the title, the address type, which was, I'm going to say we're going to do a custom value based off of what's in that SharePoint list, which I believe was called type value. And then we can take the address line, city, state, zip code. Again, you'd probably want to do some cloud immersive to split it all up. In this case, since I didn't do cloud immersive, just so that we can see that this works, I'll put it in new value. All right, so basically, if somebody goes in and approves this, it gets written to Razor's Edge. Now, since this is not being, so since the user is not part of this flow, this allows the permissioning to be based off of whoever is creating this flow. So whoever has this connection set up to the Razor's Edge, that's where it's going to show up in the audit trails as the person who updated or modified this record. It's not going to be the requester. It's going to be whose ever login that you're using when you connected to this Razor's Edge right here, which means you might want to create an API user account and use that for these types of automated flows. It's up to you how you might want to handle that. All right, let me save this. And now that I've saved this, I'm going to go to a different record in my Razor's Edge. So not Robert. Let's go back to my record, just so that we can see this in action, if it actually did anything. I am going to go in and find my custom tile, right? Change this to postal address, add some bogus content in here. Right. Change whatever type, maybe I'll make this a business address, hit submit. All right, I can just test to see that my SharePoint list gets updated. Looks like it went ahead and it added a new line for record 275. At some point, if my other flow works, I should be getting an email or a task in Teams to go ahead and approve that update that was made. So let me give this just a second and see if it runs. I just hear my email go off, and it tells me that I need to approve adding this address to the constituent, and I've got.
We can't see the approval. Can you share the?
I can.
Sorry, I'm asking you to show your email.
That's all right.
Why?
And see all the things that I haven't followed up on. And all the things that I'm late for. That's all right, it's just for Jim. So when this opens, you're gonna see.
I'm here.
You're gonna see what we had included in the flow. Constituent change was submitted. I can click on the link and actually go to the constituent. You can see that it was a postal address change. Of course, I didn't add what the new value was because it wasn't letting me at the time, but I've got two options here. I can either approve it or reject it. And if I hit approve, I can optionally enter in comments. I'm just going to hit submit here. And now if I go back to, let me close out of my email. go back to my record in Razor's Edge, and refresh this. I probably should have made it primary as well, which you can default all of that within the flow. Again, the bulk of the work here is in the flow itself. And since everyone here is a Power Automate expert, you should be able to figure that out. So contact information, since I didn't make it primary, it probably showed up at the very end. There it is, my new business address, 1235 New Address Lane in Charleston. And again, I didn't parse it out appropriately, but you can certainly use Cloud Immersive. Alternatively, if you wanted to actually have it show up in the app, you could create separate fields for city, state, zip code. I just figured it was easier to do it this way because you can use one field for everything. And then you can certainly change the visibility. If they say postal address, make sure that city, state, and zip code is lit up and visible. So all of that can be done in Power Apps if you want to. And then finally, the last thing I should probably do is I just want to make this field invisible. So I'm going to change the visibility option on this to false. And that way we're not seeing it on the tile anymore. So let me turn that off. And then I'll save it and publish it again. I will send all of this out afterwards. I might go back in and make some updates to it to make it a little bit better based off of the flow diagram that we saw in Visio, just so that you've got a little bit more than what we just did in class. But I apologize for going over. Hopefully this was helpful.
Thanks for your own question, Amy.
Yeah, really quick. Can those approvals show up in the Teams approval rather than having to go through the email?
It does both.
Oh, it does
Yeah.
both. Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I have the app downloaded on my phone, the approvals app too, so you can get push notifications as well. So there's lots of ways that you can access those approvals, and all sorts of other applications you can connect into approvals as well. So Austin, you have a question?
Yes, I do. So within the Power App, can you require, say, the submission field as something that needs to contain information in order for the submit button to push something through?
You can. And one of the things that you could do is there's a property on the submit button that there's not only a property for is it visible, but I think it's, if you want to disable it, I have to figure out, well, there's this one. There's one of the properties, I have to find which one it is, where basically you can set it as disabled until there's actually text within the text box. So that's something you can add.
Thanks.
Wonderful. Well, we appreciate your time and letting us go over. This was, another wild experiment today to try to put this together. And Trevor, you did a splendid job. So hopefully this was valuable to everybody and give you a taste of what Power Apps and tiles can do.